Hi y'all, here's a quick rundown of some of the differences between the Dino Runner game, which I've just made a video on, and the Flappy Bird style game, which I'm going to call Flying Bird here, um, which runs on the same principles, but in general works in the opposite dimension, the y-axis instead of the x-axis. So let's get started. First, same deal. I want a canvas of 1000 by 500. I'll start with a white background, and I'll have two methods additional in my Flying Bird game. Key pressed, which deals with key presses, and collide, which deals with collisions. Now, um, to start out, I'll run this, I'll show you just a blank canvas. Uh, in this case, I'm going to have a bird, and this bird is going to have a couple images associated with it for flapping, and I'll have my, instead of pipes, I'll have trees and vines, which are going to have a couple images associated with them. So I'll go to Show Sketch folder. I'll make a new folder called Data, and I will take my 4 images named as such and put them inside that data folder. So you'll see I have vine, tree, bird 1, and bird 2. So to start out, my bird is going to move in the y axis. So it's going to start with a float of x, y, width, height, vy, change in y. We're not moving the x-plane. We also have gravity, and I believe that should be sufficient. We also want a p image called bird image. We'll make a constructor which sets our defaults and instantiates our bird when we call it. Something to pay attention to later on in your coding career. And we'll say that our x value is about, let's say 100. Our y value is in the middle of this page. The height divided by 2. The width of my image is, let's say, 50. And the height we'll set to 30. And let's say 60 by 40. Then we'll say Vy of 0. Say G equals 1. And we'll say that our bird image is equal to load image bird.jpg. And we'll have another bird image. We'll call it bird image 2. And we'll name it bird2.jpg just to make sure. Bird 1 and bird 2. So this will give us some sort of flapping image when we draw it. We'll draw our show first. And show is going to be solely, initially you can say image equals, or image, bird image, x, y, width, and height. And that will just show a bird. I'm going to draw the bird here just to show you. Say bird B, I'll say B equals new bird. And then in the draw method, we'll say b.show. And let's see if this shows up. Great. So that's about where I show up. If I want to show it with a different image, I'll say bird image 2. I draw it, and it looks like that now. Slightly different birds, but you can always come up with your own. And if I want to have it alternate, I can say if frame count which is a global variable that holds the number of frames that have passed. If frame count when divided by 60 gives me a remainder of 30 or less than 30, what we can say is we want to draw image 2. Otherwise, we'll draw image 1. With the same deal, except we change it to just bird image. And if I run this, we'll see that it's sort of flapping with time. Now, we also want to make this bird move. We might want to put the initial height to be height minus 30 or 20, and this will make sure it's more centered. Yeah, that looks a little better. So now we want it to move. We make a move method. Move method says that y is added to by vy, and vy is added to by g. And that's all we need. We can always say if y is less than 0, then y is equal to 0. And that means that we can't ever hit the top of the page. And now let's add this in to say b.move, so we can see that we can fall. Maybe we can do something where we also say if y is greater than the height, y equals height. Height minus 40. There we go. So what this will do is it'll say if we hit at the bottom, we'll just be sort of chilling there. Now we also want something to do with moving our bird. So we say if key code is 32, what we can say is that we want to set the vy to be equal to something reasonable like 10. So, oops, games are hard. If we press space, the gravity is probably a little too big. Let's change it to 0.1. Oh, that is not the issue. The issue is that we should be subtracting 10 from our vy because we want to go up. And you can always change the strength of gravity here, or we'll change this to just straight up 1. Still too big. Okay, 0.5. So there's some balance that you want to have to make sure your game sort of works, where the gravity doesn't get too big and your velocity value that you can add by pressing space doesn't get too small or doesn't get too big itself. We've set it so that it's constrained to the page, but that causes a couple issues kinematically, meaning with the physics of motion, when our acceleration gets a little too much addition to our velocity. But in general, this is sort of the idea, where we have some movement, where we constrain the bird to the page, and we have some image that might switch back and forth. Now, let's do a tree and vine thing. It's going to be very similar to the cactus, except now we're checking for collision at the top and the bottom, and we have sort of this thing that moves. We have the tree at the bottom and the vine at the top, so we might call that. I'll do the tree variables at the top. And we'll say it has a width and a height. And then we'll say the same thing for the vine. I realize that v is probably a bad variable to use here, but we'll use it temporarily. You shouldn't use it. If you do, I'll know you weren't paying attention here. So let's say we have a p-image vine, and we'll have a p-image tree. So here, we'll say void, we'll say tree vine as my constructor, set my defaults. We'll have a void move, and we'll have a void show. And show is going to show my tree and my vine. But first, let's set some defaults. So the tree is always going to be shown at the height of the page minus the tree height. We'll start with a tree width, th equals random 0, comma height over 2 minus 10 and minus 20. Give us some room. And t width equals t height divided by 2. So it's always going to be half as wide as it is tall. And we'll say that the position is based on where the height is. And we want to say that the tree Vx is equal to, let's say 10, negative 10. So it goes to the left at speed 10. Likewise, we'll want the same type of deal for the v values, for the vine values. We'll say that instead of ren, we'll want something similar here. We want a maximum gap of about, a minimum gap of about 40. That should be just, let's make it minus 25. That gives us a little more room for the bird to get through. And this makes sense here, same placement. And what we'll say is that instead of that, we'll just say we start at 0. And then finally, we want some values for the images. P-image, you want to say that the vine equals load image. Don't know why I did that, not defining it. Load image vine.jpg. And I want to say that tree.jpg. Okay, so let's talk about moving my tree and vine and showing my tree and vine. Well, showing the tree and vine is really easy. We can say we want to draw an image of the tree at x, tx, ty, t width, and t height. An image of the vine at vx, vy, v width, and v height. So now that's all done. They're not changing, they just move. So we say that the tx is increased by the tvx, and the vx is increased by the vvx. So the tree x is increased by the vine x, and by the tree velocity. The vine x is increased by the vine velocity. And we want to say if vx is less than 0, less than the width of v width. We want to say vx equals 1100 if tx is less than taw. So what we want to say is if we go off the page, we want to jump back to the right side of the page. So now let's see if we can actually get this to work. And we'll say tree vine equals new tree vine. I'll name this just for some clarity and lack of confusion. So we'll say the oak dot show oak dot move. Technically these should be reversed, but this is fine. So if I run this, I don't see, oh, I see that I have something floating up above. And there's a little bit of an issue there where things are a little too thin. So we don't want them to be random 0. We want it to be random maybe, let's say, like that. So I have vines coming up the top and trees coming at the bottom, and they keep reappearing. And I realize there's a little bit of bug where this should be negative. So this will make it go off the page instead. So each tree vine pair has a random width and height. And one thing I could do is every time I go off the page, instead of just resetting the Vx and the Tx, instead of just resetting the dimensions or the position, I could also reset the dimensions. And so the way to do that is to say that VW sort of the same idea as up here, VH is, and same deal here. So we set a random TH value, and then we again say VW equals VH over 2, and TW equals TH over 2. And this way we just get reset values every time they pass, so we should get different trees each time we go through. So there's still some slight bugs here, but in general, it sort of looks pretty good. Now the issue would be where it's drawn, which is over here. Yeah, so the Y value has to be reset for the tree, but not for the vine. There you go. And so this should fix that bug where things are not appearing at the right places. You might want to change to make sure your vine looks pretty, but this is the idea, that you're always going to have different sized pipes and maybe different sized openings each time you run through. And if you want a second set, that's relatively easy. Maybe I'll make an oak 2, or maybe a birch. We'll say birch equals new tree vine, and then you could go here and you could say birch dot move and birch dot show, and you could have it start at dot vx equals 1500, birch dot tx equals 1500, and that way I have sort of a couple sets of vines appearing all over the place where I have different values, and it looks a little more like the game you're used to. So one thing that you can do, and things are sort of not syncing up now for a couple reasons, mostly because the vine and the tree are of different widths. If you want to change that, you set them to the same width. But in general, you can set this, and you can write your own collide method, very similar to the Dino Runner game. Go through and look at that. It should be very similar, and try it out.